It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 629 of Rico Brogna. Just a few weeks away from spring training, thank goodness. Even though it is 5 degrees outside, just the idea, just the thought of Met players having a catch in Port St. Lucie, Florida, makes you think of spring. So we are getting closer and closer to the start of spring training. On today's Rico Brogna, we will focus on the beloved Mets that we had lost in free agency and really try to kind of put, where does Pete Alonso going to rank in all of this? Where's Edwin Diaz going to rank in all of this? But we will take a look at all of the major free agents that the Mets have lost over the years in terms of the way we react to it as fans. Some of these, as you're going to notice, were bad at the time. Like, we felt horrible at the time losing a beloved Met. But the facts actually bear out that they didn't go somewhere and have great success. So it'll be interesting. We'll take a look at what that player did upon leaving the Mets. And then maybe even more importantly, what happened to the Mets after they lost that player. So we'll go through a lot of those guys over the next period of time here on today's Rico Brogna. A couple of things I want to start with. Number one, Luis Reyes settled on a 1-year contract with the San Francisco Giants. I had mentioned Reyes' name early on this offseason, pretty much in the Jorge Polanco role is the way I viewed him. A guy who could play some first base, potentially play some second base, but more likely than not end up DHing a lot, because the truth about Reyes is he isn't much of a defensive player. And the reality about Luis Reyes, and I thought this was a fascinating free agency just to see what the market thought of him. The market doesn't care about your batting average. You know, as much as maybe I care still about it a little bit, and a lot of people out there still care about it, it doesn't matter. You have to do other things. And the problem with Luis Reyes' game is, yes, he makes a lot of contact. Yes, he hits for a high batting average. He doesn't do anything else well. He's not a good defender. He's not fast. He doesn't have pop. It's those two qualities. I think those two qualities are important. I think depending on the way your lineup is built, it's nice to have a guy like Luis Reyes. But it took until the final day of January, and it took a 1-year deal in the prime of his career age-wise for Reyes to settle on a deal with San Francisco. He ended up not making sense for this Met team. Like I mentioned earlier on during this offseason, prior to signing Polanco and even Bo Bichette, I had mentioned him as a guy that could make sense. But I think as this offseason went on, we kind of knew Luis Reyes was not going to be a fit for this team. But it's a reminder that batting average and contact, as cool as it is, as rare as it is, it doesn't get you paid. Number two, the continuing free agency of Framber Valdez. I just don't see a world, no matter what he has to settle for contract-wise, where the Mets are going to get involved. And I think what's really going to hurt Framber Valdez right now, besides maybe his reputation that he needs to fix from the whole let me cross up my catcher and hit him on purpose situation, is the fact that he is a qualifying offered free agent. And when you're a qualifying offered free agent and you already have draft picks attached to you, and now you're going to have to settle for a short-term deal, that's going to affect teams. Teams are not going to want to hand out draft picks or lose a draft pick for a guy that may be there temporarily. So as much as Valdez's market continues to dry up, I don't see the Mets getting involved. Now, keep this in mind about the whole draft pick situation with the Mets. They obviously gained a pick by losing Edwin Diaz, who was a qualifying offered free agent, but then they signed Bo Bichette. Instead of losing a 2 and a 5 for Bo, they're losing really only one pick, because one of the picks they were going to lose, they got back in the Edwin Diaz deal. I still don't see a scenario where the Mets are going to sign a second qualifying offered free agent. And as good as Framber Valdez is, I feel sort of content with this rotation right now. Like, what really changes the perception of the rotation, and even my feelings on this rotation, is that you've put at the top of it, I don't want to say sure thing, because nobody's a sure thing when it comes to pitching in Major League Baseball, but a surer thing than most in Freddie Peralta in the prime of his career. You know, a little different than Framber, who's a little bit older than Peralta, where it isn't crazy to think that this could be a crash and burn year for him just based on the amount of innings he's thrown. So I like the idea that this rotation features a horse, a guy who you feel at least somewhat confident will continue the trajectory of the last 3 years to go along with, yes, a couple of guys that need to bounce back in Senga and Minaya, a guy who's trying to build off his first year as a starter in Clay Holmes, Nolan McLean, who may burst into ace form, hopefully, and then a few young pitchers who could contribute at some point this year in Jonah Tong and Christian Scott. It's not to say that adding Framber Valdez, if all things were equal, wouldn't be, a nice move. I just think when you combine the age question, when you combine, I guess, the personality question, which apparently is still a concern, and then the fact that you're going to lose a draft pick for him, I just don't see the Mets getting involved on a short-term deal, nor do I think it's as necessary as it felt 3 weeks ago before they traded for Peralta. The other thing is I want to respond to an email that was fascinating, and it had me thinking, and I think it's going to have everybody else thinking as well. It came from Nicholas. Nicholas writes, why do I think 2026 will be the year of the ex-Mets? We're going to look up in July, and Pete Alonso will be leading the American League in OPS. Edwin Diaz will be leading the league in saves. Jacob deGrom will be in the Cy Young conversation. Jeff McNeil's going to be a scrappy, super valuable leader on a successful young A's team. And Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat will both be key contributors to a first-place Brewers team. Nimmo will still be ass and hurt. But still the point stands. What do you think? Rank them from most likely to least likely. That's a good question. I will tell you that even if all of that is true, right? Everything you say is accurate about the former Mets having monster years in 2026. That may not make us depressed, because if the Mets are having a big year, if the new Mets are having a big year, and despite all of what you described is going on while the Mets are in first place, I think we'll be okay. We'll be able to get over it a little bit easier if there's success here. Let's make that perfectly clear. How would I rank them in terms of the likeliest success? I would put Pete Alonso number one. And the reason I'd put Pete number one as compared to Diaz and Jacob deGrom and Brandon Nimmo, and who else did you mention? Sproat and Jet Williams, is that one thing about Pete in his time here is that he's a sure thing. Even in the years where Pete wasn't his best, like 2024, prior to the big home run against Milwaukee and Devin Williams, he still played every game, or at least mostly every game. He still hit over 30 home runs. He still drove in runs, even if it wasn't his best year. Unlike Diaz, who's missed a season, who's had bad years. Let's not forget, Edwin lost his closer's job 2 years ago. He's a reliever. The idea that Edwin Diaz can't have a bad year, of course he can. I wouldn't bet on it necessarily, but if you ask me, what am I more confident in happening? Pete Alonso just doing Pete Alonso things versus Edwin Diaz being a dominant closer? I would side with Pete just based on the track record. As much as I love Jacob deGrom, what do you want me to tell you? The guy's hurt a lot. He was healthy last year. Good for him, but he's getting older. I can't bank on the fact that deGrom's going to be healthy. As far as Jeff McNeil's concerned, while he hasn't been all bad, he has not been the guy who won a batting title since he won a batting title. And with Brandon Sproat and Jet Williams, they're young players. In terms of Brandon Nimmo, I wouldn't agree that he's ass, but I do think as he gets older, there's certainly a better chance he's just going to miss time. So if I had to rank it, I think Pete Alonso is the guy who probably is the best of the former Mets. But again, as much as maybe I didn't want to lose Pete, and as much as maybe you didn't want to lose Pete, Pete could have the greatest year in the world. If the guys here are playing well, I'll be okay. I guess there'll still be a part of me that's, man, we could have brought Pete back. Like, that'll always be there, as you'll hear in this Rico we're about to do on other guys they've lost over the years. But as long as the Mets are successful, that'll make it easier. And that's a perfect transition into the main subject on today's Rico Brogna, episode 629. When we lose a beloved Met. When and how does it feel when we lose somebody as a free agent? Now, a couple of ground rules before we get into the specific names. A lot of these guys were guys we thought would be career Mets, but not all, because there were free agents we lost that we will discuss on today's Rico Brogna that were on other teams before they got here. So, yes, I think a lot of the focus is going to be on the Alonso-like career Mets, but they all weren't like that. Edwin Diaz is a great example. Edwin Diaz was a Mariner before he was a Met. I think that there's probably a stronger connection with the players that were career Mets. But we're going to talk about all the free agents that left that caused either emotional damage or just from a baseball standpoint, we wanted the guy back. Tom Seaver, I want to discuss him real quick. Tom Seaver was a trade. I think we all know that. So for the sake of this Rico Brogna, despite him being like the number one beloved Met that really scarred a generation of Met fans, I can't include his trade to Cincinnati. I think it's different. It was a trade. But what I do want to discuss briefly on Tom Seaver, because I kind of go both ways on this, was when they lost him in this odd free agent dispersal draft. I'm not even sure that's what it was called, but I'll set it up real quick. So back in the 80s, and this is, still when free agency was pretty new, one of the deals that came out of the work stoppage of 1981 is that when a team lost a free agent, they would actually be able to replace that player through a pool of players that weren't protected around Major League Baseball. So I forget the specifics, but just a rough example, the Mets could protect 15 guys off of their active roster. And of the guys that aren't protected, teams that lost a free agent would be able to select them. I wouldn't call it free agency, but it's similar to free agency. It is not a trade. The Mets didn't get something back. The Mets decided we're not going to protect these players. Other teams decided we're not going to protect these players. And then a team that lost a free agent can select one of the players that's not protected. I would almost compare it a little bit to the expansion draft. And it's been a long time in baseball since we've had an expansion draft. You got to go all the way back to prior to the 98 season when the Diamondbacks and the Tampa Bay Devil Rays became teams where we had to protect players, and those that are not protected could be picked in this expansion draft. That's the real one that's sort of crazy that I would kind of use in this edition of the Rico. The Mets bring Tom Seaver back. He has this dramatic opening day. It's a famous moment in Met history where he's walking from the bullpen to a standing ovation. It's opening day 1983. Tom Seaver is back. He's on the Mets. They've righted the wrong, something this franchise did not do with a lot of the free agents we're going to talk about. Tom Seaver's back and actually goes out and has a decent 1983. And Frank Cashin made the mistake of not protecting him before the 1984 season, and he was selected by the Chicago White Sox. My dad wrote a letter to Frank Cashin, all pissed off about it. And I think what Frank Cashin eventually said was, I screwed up. I made a mistake. I think the conspiracy theory is that he didn't make a mistake and that he wanted to lose Tom Seaver. But it is fair to wonder if Tom Seaver was still a Met in 1984 with a rookie Doc Gooden, and Tom Seaver was still a Met in 1985 as the Mets continued their march to successfulness and in this great pennant race with the St. Louis Cardinals. And if Tom Seaver was a Met in 1986, remember, he was on the Red Sox in 86. He was not active in that World Series, but he was on the Red Sox. It's crazy to think about Tom Seaver being connected to the great mid-80s Mets as opposed to coming back for 1 year and Cashin losing him. So I don't know where to put this. Is this a free agent loss? Is this something else? I mean, it's clearly something weird because it doesn't count as a trade. It's not technically free agency, but that's brutal. And in a lot of ways, it's worse than free agency because you didn't need to give Tom Seaver a new contract. You didn't need to pay him a lot of money. You didn't need to battle with the open market. You simply needed to protect him. And Frank Cashin decided not to. So it's a bad one. And Seaver, despite his age, had a good 1984, had a good 1985, maybe not to the level of what he was in the late 60s and early 70s, but still a guy making 30-plus starts, pitching to a mid-threes ERA. How does it change Met history? Does it mean the Mets aren't trading for Bob Ojeda before the 86 season? I don't know. I mean, you could certainly argue that maybe other things change if Tom Seaver's there, but at least we would have been able to see Tom Seaver and Doc Gooden in the same rotation. That did not happen. So where do you want to put that? That's up to you, the Rico listener and or viewer. If you're the older Met fan, that one stings. If you're the younger Met fan, it's a weird, weird story. Now let's get, in no particular order, to the free agents that the Mets have lost. And what we will talk about is, A, what the player ended up doing, but also what happened to the Mets upon losing him. Because those are the two big questions. I mentioned earlier, and it's a reason why I read that email by Nick. It's a good one about the former Mets and the years they have in 2026. It is easier, in my opinion, to deal with losing somebody if you're then successful. It is. If you're not successful, what you're going to see is a running trend in losing free agents in Met history. It makes it worse, specifically Jose Reyes. So let's go back to 2011. Jose Reyes wins the batting title. Jose Reyes does his bunt and run gimmick on the final game of the season, which a lot of people were upset about. I wasn't. I defended it on WFAN. I guess it's still one of those Met debates we could have. Jose Reyes was in the prime of his career. The Wilpons own the New York Mets. Going in a free agency, I had hoped they would keep him, despite the Mets struggles over the last few years, 2009, 2010, 2011. Reyes was coming off the best year of his Met career. He was playing in a ballpark that felt like was built for him. And I guess the feeling I had at the time was, if they wouldn't trade him, which they decided not to do in the middle of his great season, then clearly they were serious about keeping him. Well, on December 7th, 2011, the Miami Marlins signed Jose Reyes to a 6-year, $106 million deal. My thought at the time was, why not give it to him? Yes, it's a long-term contract. Yes, it's a lot of money. This is a career Met. This is a career Met coming off a batting title. And if the Mets are going to turn their franchise around, and just think about where we were at that point in 2011, it still felt like we were in the wilderness. Losing a really good player for nothing didn't seem like good business. So two things about losing Jose Reyes. Number one, 2012, 2013, 2014 would follow. 3 consecutive losing seasons. 3 consecutive bad seasons. 3 consecutive years in which, especially lineup-wise, things felt hopeless. You were starting to see the young pitching, but that had nothing to do with keeping or letting Jose Reyes go. In terms of Reyes' success, his first year in Miami, his only year in Miami, was fine. Like, he put up a 780 OPS. He went out and played most of the time and really was, I guess, equivalent to the rest of his Met career. But here's where things get kind of funny when you talk about Jose Reyes' post-Mets career. So he has that year in Miami. He's a 3-WAR player, plays 160 games, 287 average, 780 OPS, which is slightly above his career OPS. Like, his career OPS with the Mets was 670. So he puts up a 780 season. He plays every game. And we look at this 30-year-old Jose Reyes or 29-year-old Jose Reyes and say, we could have used him. This was a bad decision. But after that, we started to see Jose Reyes decline, whether it was his health or his performance. The Marlins trade him after 1 year, which was the biggest non-surprise ever. Clearly, that was the Marlins strategy. And remember, they were trying to sign Albert Pujols as well, but Albert Pujols insisted on a full no trade. They wouldn't give it to him because Albert Pujols knew exactly what that fraud franchise was doing. So Reyes has the 1 good year with Miami. They trade him to Toronto. In his full first year in Toronto, he misses half the season. He's productive. He's hitting 296. He's got a 780 OPS, the same OPS he had with Miami. So again, productive, but you start to see maybe one of the fears that the Mets could have had about Jose Reyes entering his 30s. Is he going to stay on the field? His next season, year 3 now of this contract, 2014, would be the last good year of Jose Reyes' career. He put up a 3.4 WAR, which is not, that amazing. I mean, he had about 5 years better than that with the Mets, but he hit 287, hit 9 home runs, 51 RBIs. He stole 30 bases, 726 OPS. You could even argue it's not that great of a season, but I like to say it was a productive season. He went out and played every game. He stole 30 bases, hit for a pretty good batting average. Fine year for Jose Reyes. So we are now 3 years into his 6-year contract. Year 4 with the Toronto Blue Jays, he plays half the season, 285, 4 home runs, 16 RBIs, 708 OPS, and gets shipped out to the Colorado Rockies, where he falls off the rooftop. Negative WAR player in the 47 games he played. Batting average dips to 259 with a 659 OPS. And that's where he runs into his off-the-field issues. The Colorado Rockies decide, even before the final year of his contract, to just get rid of him. And that's when we try to, I guess, right the wrong of losing him by bringing Jose Reyes back halfway through the 2016 season. And this is a rare one because in a lot of the cases we're about to talk about, there was no wrong righted. The guy's let go and he never comes back. And in this case, I didn't love that they brought him back. I remember at the time, the discussion was Jose Reyes ran into off the field issues in which he was accused of terrible things, domestic abuse to be specific. And looking at where the Mets were and looking at really specifically what Reyes was accused of, I didn't have any interest in bringing him back. I'll be honest with you. And I think I was the minority. I think a lot of Met fans were more on the emotional side of, yes, he's accused of bad things. Yes, he probably made a mistake, but I forgive him, bring him back. And look, we've talked about this all the time when it comes to giving guys second chances. Guys deserve second chances. I'm certainly not going to tell you they never deserve it. But a lot of times it's, hey, is the juice worth the squeeze? So I was not in favor of bringing in Jose Reyes back. He comes back. He has some pretty good moments in 2016. I can't lie. I remember that as Drupal Cabrera game. Reyes hit a big home run in that game. So he had good moments in a year in which the Mets were in a pennant race. But then in 2017 and 2018, he was awful. And coming on the air basically saying they got a DFA Jose Reyes was not ideal. So what's the jury on losing Reyes? Like, think about that. 6-year contract. The first year 1 and year 3 are good. No one would say great. They were good. OPS is right around his career numbers. The average was solid. Didn't watch him every day, but I assume his defense was still okay. He's still stealing bases, but not at the level he used to, but never even came close to matching the numbers he put up with the Mets. So with history now as our guide, was it really a mistake not re-signing Jose Reyes to a 6-year, $108 million deal? And the facts are, it really wasn't. Especially when you look at 2015, because that's one aspect of it I always like to think about. Okay, they weren't ready to win in 2012 and 2013 and 2014, but if the Mets did bring Reyes back, in year 4 of the contract, he's the shortstop. It's not Ruben Tejada. It's not Wilmer Flores. It's Jose Reyes. But the reality is 2015 Jose Reyes wasn't very good. So what was the real benefit? I was upset when they lost him. I think we all were. But when you look at what ended up happening to him, when you look at his production, and even the turnaround that the Mets eventually got to in 2015, I think it's safe to say, you tell me if I'm wrong, Hoff, with history as our guide, it's been over a decade now since they lost Jose Reyes. Is it fair to say it kind of worked out? That as much as we were pissed off at Jeff Wilpon, as much as we were annoyed at Met ownership, with history able to be looked upon, maybe the Mets were right to let Jose Reyes go. And I guess I would phrase it a little bit different. Not that they were right, because I think that ownership let him go for all the wrong reasons. Sometimes things work out, but it wasn't your intention. Like, I don't know if it was one of those things where Sandy Alderson wanted to bring him back and ownership said, absolutely not. Alderson has since said that, yeah, if the price was right, we would have brought him back, which leads me to the thesis that, no, this was just ownership being cheap. And more times than not, when it comes to free agency, it doesn't work out. That's the risk of free agency. We've talked about this a lot throughout this offseason in regards to David Stearns. Yeah, you got to take risks. A lot of times it doesn't work. I totally get it. So in this case, the Mets took no risk. They let Jose Reyes go. And yeah, it worked out because most of the time free agents don't work out. So you tell me if I'm wrong, Huff. Would you agree that letting Jose Reyes go was a decision that eventually worked out?
Yeah, no, it definitely worked out, but I do wish I could have seen Jose play in his quote-unquote prime, because he at that moment when he signed that contract, he was in his prime. I would have loved to seen him play a little bit longer in Citi Field to see how that ballpark would have worked towards him.
Well,
would they have touched the walls? Would they have moved the walls in?
Well, it's funny. We now know we did see Jose Reyes in his prime. Like, his best years were clearly with the New York Mets. If you're going by whatever metric you want to go by, I think his 4 best seasons were as a New York Met. So we saw him in his prime. That's They let him go in his prime, but what we saw ended up happening was the decline of Jose Reyes. But to your point, if he stays in that ballpark, is the production better? Maybe. The one thing I know is that the Mets' failures in 12, 13, and 14 weren't going to change because Jose Reyes was there. I think we would have been more entertained. We would have been like, oh, we get to see our guy. But I don't think the results would have been any different. And looking at 2015, Jose Reyes on the Mets versus not on the Mets, I don't think would have made a big difference considering where Reyes was in 2015.
And here's the other thing, too, and this is actually something that's good for today's Mets. We heard Bo Bichette say, I don't really know if I would have lasted as long and played every day on that turf in Toronto.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that really did affect Jose Reyes.
You never know. You never know. All right, let's get to free agent number 2, and this is widely considered one of the most painful losses in Met history. Joe B has talked about this a lot, and that's the loss of Darryl Strawberry on November 8th, 1990. Early. That's an early loss in free agency. That's one of my first early memories as a Met fan. I was young at the time. I was only 7, and I knew Darryl Strawberry. I guess that would be similar to what my kids are dealing with right now in losing Pete Alonso. But he signed a 5-year, $20.5 million contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers. There are 2 parts to the Darryl loss. Really 3 parts. There's the what could have been for Darryl personally, that going back home to Los Angeles was not good for him, as he has later addressed. So, yes, things could have been different if Darryl stayed in New York, as opposed to going home to Los Angeles, where he ran with some bad crowds. Number 2 is what happened to Darryl, which is not just the off the field stuff, but obviously that led to performance. He was never the same player. When we go over the numbers of what happened to Darryl Strawberry, his first year in Los Angeles was fine. He had 265. He hit 28 home runs. He drove in 99 runs. He had a 3.7 WAR. So there were 5 seasons with the Mets, 5 of his 8, in which he produced a higher WAR. I don't love WAR. The reason I use it in this case is just to kind of describe the value of what the player did with us and then after. So if you want to use home runs, that's totally fine. He hit 28 home runs with LA. With the Mets, he had 26, 26, 29, so one higher, 39, 39, 37, 29 home runs. So he had 4 seasons in which he hit a greater home run total than the total he hit in his year in Los Angeles, and 3 seasons with more RBIs. It was certainly not a bad year. He had an 852 OPS. His OPS with the Mets was 878. So, fine year. He was an all-star. Very similar to Jose Reyes. His first year away was a fine season. And it coincided with the demise of the Mets, because 1991 was the beginning of the sucking. They lost 90-plus games that year. The following year would be the worst team money could buy. And the year after that, they're losing over 100 games. And they're in the abyss. So the Mets lose Darryl Strawberry. They decide signing Vince Coleman is the right idea. And they go into the toilet. Darryl Strawberry has 1 good statistical year. And then after that, he never was a full-time player ever again. And this is where you go to, unfortunately, the decision to go back home and the ramifications of that and the drug issues that Darryl had. And look, it's also very possible he stays with the Mets. The same demons battle him. It's probably likely. That's why the Darryl discussion is a delicate one and it's complicated. I think the Darryl discussion from a Met fan perspective is more about what happened to the franchise than what happened to Darryl Strawberry. Because there's no denying his career was never the same after his first year in LA. Just to go through his rare times on the field, and it's kind of crazy. Year 2 in LA, 1992, he played 43 games. And even when he played, he wasn't very good. 1993, he was a negative WAR player, only played 32 games and batted 140 with a 577 OPS. In 94 was the year he went to San Francisco and played with the San Francisco Giants, and he had drug issues. Again, that popped up. He only played 29 games, hit 239. He then goes to the Yankees, where he has production and has some good years, but never as a full-time player. He only had one more year in his career where he played over 100 games, 101 games in 1998. And we all remember he also battled cancer. So I think when we talk about Darryl Strawberry, it's about what ended up happening to the Mets in terms of why we view it the way we view it. Because if they re-sign him, I don't know what ends up happening. It's one of the biggest what ifs that you could ever come up with as a Met fan, as a human. Like, what happens? Does he stay on the field? Is he productive? Does he get the help he needs? I have no idea. What I do know is that letting him go was the sign of the demise. It was the real sign that the 80s were over, that team, despite all the changes that had already occurred, Keith Hernandez was already gone. Gary Carter was already gone. Davey Johnson was already fired, right? There were so many things that were changing about that late 80s team. It was done. It was over. But Darryl Strawberry was the real end, and it was the beginning of the demise. And you're noticing a trend here. When they lose Jose Reyes, 3 consecutive losing seasons. When they lose Darryl Strawberry, 6 consecutive losing seasons, and some of the worst seasons in the history of the franchise. As painful as it is, if we're being honest, if we're looking at the results, if we're just going black and white, let's just look at the results, letting Darryl Strawberry go, I wouldn't say it was a great decision because we know what happened to the Mets, but in terms of what ended up happening to his career, I don't know if it would have changed the fortunes of the Mets. So it's one of those losses that's more about emotion and more about he should have been a forever Met more than it was about what actually happened next. Now, we're about to get to a free agent loss that I am very confident when this Rico Brogna is done, if you're being open-minded, is far and away the worst free agent loss in the history of the New York Mets. It is not Darryl Strawberry as much as it hurts you. It's not Jose Reyes as much as it hurts you. If we're going by numbers and we're going by performance, it is far and away Zack Wheeler, which is kind of crazy because unlike Darryl and unlike Reyes, I remember when Wheeler left. I remember what Brody Van Wagenen said about when Zack Wheeler left and what a lot of Met fans said, not all, and that was, hey, he's not that good. What are the Phillies paying? They're giving him a 5-year, $118 million deal? What are they doing? Well, on December 9th, 2019, the Mets let Zack Wheeler go. Zack Wheeler was starting to emerge. Remember the history of Zack Wheeler. It's obviously connected to the now Hall of Famer Carlos Beltran because he was what we got back when the Mets traded Carlos Beltran to the San Francisco Giants. And Zack Wheeler was a part of the hope that we had of the new generation of New York Mets pitchers. It wasn't Generation K, but they got Zack Wheeler. Matt Harvey's a big prospect. Eventually, we saw the emergence of Jacob deGrom and the trade of R.A. Dickey for Noah Syndergaard, and he was a part of that mix of players. But when Zack Wheeler first came over, he was impressive. When he came up and made his major league debut back in 2012 was when he came up. Zack Wheeler came up, he made 17 starts, he pitched to a mid-3 ERA. He looked like the real deal as a young 23-year-old. The following year, in 2014, Zack Wheeler comes out. He makes every single start, 32 starts, pitches to a 3.5 ERA, and we are at least convinced we got a pretty good arm. Maybe he'll develop into a great arm, but man, that guy comes out. He takes the ball every 5 days. This is fantastic. We have a guy. Unfortunately, Zach runs into the Tommy John, which is something a lot of young pitchers face. It sucks. And it wipes out the 2015 season. So as the Mets are emerging, Matt Harvey's coming back from Tommy John. Jacob deGrom is beginning his second full season. We hear so much about Noah Syndergaard. We hear so much about Steven Matz. Zack Wheeler, zero factor in 2015. To the point where, and we sort of forget this, but we shouldn't, he was traded to the Brewers in the Carlos Gomez trade. We remember Wilmer Flores and we remember the crying, but let's not forget an injured Zack Wheeler was going to Milwaukee, which at the time I was okay with. As much as I liked Zack Wheeler, I looked at, well, we have Harvey, we have deGrom, we have Syndergaard, we have Matz, and I want to win. And who knows what Zack will be coming off of Tommy John. He misses 2015. He misses 2016, which is crazy. It's crazy to think with all the guys that have come back from Tommy John missing parts of a season or a whole season. He missed 2 entire seasons at age 25 and 26. He comes back in 2017 and he sucks. He pitches. It's great to see him. He's not very good. 2018, he starts to emerge. We see him pitch really well in the second half of that year, goes 180 innings, makes 29 starts, pitches to a 3.3 ERA. He's 28 years old, best season of his career. Jake is at his height. Wheeler's now back. Here we go. And then in 2019, he has a fine year. Like, it's okay. Again, takes the ball every 5 days. He throws 195 innings, but he pitches to a 3.96 ERA. When he got to free agency, I could tell you what I thought. My thought was, I'd like to keep him. We've put so much sweat equity into this player. We've watched him grow. We watched him get hurt. We've now watched him sort of figure it out. I wanted to keep him. When I saw what the Phillies gave him, was it a lot? Yeah, I remember I actually did, it wasn't a Rico Brogna at the time. I was just doing the Evan Roberts podcast, which is almost the George Washington to the Rico. I would do a lot of Rico things, but it was about everything. Sometimes it'd be about the Nets, the Mets, wrestling, whatever. And so I'm sure if you go into the archives of the Evan Roberts podcast, which is basically a defunct podcast now, I just don't have the time. I do the Rico. What can I tell you? My reaction to Zack on a drive home Rico was, yeah, it's a lot of money, but I wanted to keep him. I wanted to see it through. He goes to Philadelphia. Van Wagenen makes the douchey comment about, well, we got Zack Wheeler paid. Basically, we got him the money. And then Zack Wheeler proceeds in 2020, which was obviously part of a season, but still, nevertheless, it was a season. 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, really up until his injury late in 2025, he has been, along with Garrett Cole, the most reliable, dominant starting pitcher in this sport. So what Zack Wheeler ended up doing dwarfs anything Darryl Strawberry did, anything Jose Reyes did, and wait till the rest of the Rico, basically anything anyone else did. Just to give you perspective, when Zack Wheeler was a Met for 5 seasons, he combined for a 9 WAR. In the 6 seasons in Philadelphia, he was a 30 WAR. If you don't like that, I'll just give you the numbers. 5 seasons with the Mets, 3.77 ERA. 6 seasons with the Phillies, 2.91 ERA. One of the most dominant pitchers in this sport. And maybe we didn't all react the way we reacted to losing Reyes or losing Straw or even losing Daniel Murphy, who we're about to get to. But in terms of the results, in terms of what Zack Wheeler's gone on to do, and he doesn't have to do another damn thing in Philadelphia for us to look at it and say, that's as bad as it gets. As far as Daniel Murphy's concerned, the Daniel Murphy thing is one of the free agent losses that I so regret as a Met fan because I was okay losing him. And it sucks, but I admit it. I don't want to sit here and lie to you because I thought, I remember my dad saying the same thing. We were both on the same page that his postseason in 2015 was just a hot streak. Daniel Murphy was what he was. Very likable ball player, very solid ball player. I am not putting him down. But he was what he was, a 7 OPS kind of guy. He'll give you a 280 batting average. He doesn't strike out a lot, but he doesn't hit for power. I mean, he hits 12 home runs a year. He's not great defensively. Early in his career, they were trying to find a spot for him. Is it left field? Johan Santana said, no, thank you. Is it third base? Is it second base? Is it first base? He obviously ends up at second. He's not good defensively, and he's an okay hitter. He was always overrated. And I like Daniel Murphy. I still like that. I like Daniel Murphy more today than ever. But I always viewed him as overrated amongst Met fans. We viewed him as better than what he was. But I will never, ever forget, and this is why Daniel has become one of my all-time favorites, what he did in 2015. I mean, that just shoots you up a level, As overrated as I may have thought he was in the regular season, his postseason was magic. It was majestic. Like, I mean, there's no bad word to say about it. But when he got to free agency and Joe B was screaming, you got to keep him, and a lot of Met fans were calling up the station saying you got to keep him, I was sort of on the side of, well, we don't really need to keep him. How good is he? We all know what he is. And the idea that that postseason was going to lead to something, like it was going to resurrect his career, I thought was nuts. Well, I was nuts because what he ends up doing in 2016, 985 OPS leads the league. I thought he should have won the MVP. For my money, he was the MVP of the league. He hits 347. He hits 25 home runs, never hit more than 14 in his career. Drives in 104 runs, never drove in more than 73 in his career. He struck out 57 times. That's it. 57. While hitting 347 with 25 home runs. He was a monster. And look, if Daniel Murphy re-signs with the Mets, and I'm going to assume puts up that kind of production, 2016 has played out very differently. Granted, the Mets ended up making the playoffs as a wild card team, had to play that wild card game against San Francisco and Madison Bumgarner, but maybe the Mets win the division. I don't know. Maybe the whole season goes different. Maybe in that game against Bumgarner, he continues his October heroics, and it's just different. And he follows that up the following year with not as good of a year, but still a far better year than he ever had in any year with the New York Mets. 322, 23 home runs, 93 RBIs, a 928 OPS. After that, so it was 2 years of just utter brilliance. That was kind of it for him. We saw him have a tough time staying healthy and just not being nearly as productive as the guy he was in those 2 years in Washington. The contract he signed was 3 years, $37 million. So if you're looking at the contract, 2 of those 3 years were majestic. And that is up there. I ain't, downplaying it. That's up there as one of the worst free agent losses in the history of the franchise. In fact, as we do this, worse than Reyes in terms of production, worse than Strawberry in terms of production, not as bad as Zack Wheeler, but pretty freaking bad. And here's the funny thing, and it's not funny, it makes me want to cry. Wheeler and Murphy leave inside the division. Reyes leaves inside the division too, but obviously doesn't come back and haunt us. And let me throw in the fact that Daniel Murphy did unspeakable things to us head-to-head. So not only is he putting up these massive numbers, he's coming back to Citi Field, and it's his playground. Daniel Murphy is one of the rare guys who could appear on the Rico as 2 different editions. He could be on the Killers edition of the Rico and could also come on as a Met legend that we love. He can do both. How many guys can do that? How many guys can literally do a whole lot? We could do a whole freaking episode with this guy just talking about how he tortured us in 2016 and 2017. Just that. And then we could do an episode appreciating what he was as a New York Met, specifically an incredible, incredible October run. But I've made a lot of dumb opinions on sports talk radio in my life, and I own it. Being okay with losing Daniel Murphy may be the top of the list. Let's get to Edgardo Alfonzo. This is one I took very hard. The Mets let Edgardo Alfonzo go on December 15th, 2002. He signed with the San Francisco Giants on a 4-year, $26 million contract. Obviously, the Mets were really changing at this time. They brought in Roberto Alomar. They had brought in Tommy Glavine. They would bring in Mo Vaughn. They were doing a lot of things that were big market, but obviously none of these things worked. Edgardo Alfonzo was one of my favorite Mets because he was, I talk about Murphy being overrated. I love you, Murph. But Edgardo Alfonzo was underrated because Edgardo Alfonzo not only put up, great numbers, hitting above 300. His final career average as a Met was 292, 812 OPS. He played great defense at second. He played great defense at third. But more than all of that, I always felt Edgardo Alfonzo got the big hit that no one would pay attention to. In the 10-run inning against Atlanta, we all remember Mike Piazza. The truth is, Alfonzo had the big hit prior to Mike Piazza. When we think of the postseason in 1999, maybe we think of Todd Pratt hitting the home run against Matt Manti. I think of Edgardo Alfonso hitting a grand slam against Bobby Schwannard. He was so clutch in 99 and 2000. And you look at the numbers, he was rewarded, especially with WAR, because of his great defense. He was a 6-WAR player in 1999, 304, 27, and 108 with an 886 OPS. He finished 8th in the MVP voting. In 2000, the one year he was an all-star, which is ridiculous, only once, he was a 6.4 WAR player, hit 324 with 25 home runs and 94 RBIs and a 967 OPS. Then you throw in the fact that in his postseason career with the Mets in 99 and 2000, he went out and hit and was clutch, hit 4 home runs in 24 postseason games with 17 RBIs. He was a tremendous New York Met. And when the Mets decided to let him go, it was very difficult. It was very frustrating to see Edgardo Alfonso not be here anymore because he was a career Met. And if you look at the way he was producing before they let him go, there wasn't a real sign that he was on the decline. He was also only 28 years old. There was talk back then that he wasn't really 28 years old. And I always thought that was unfair. Now, I don't know what his true age is. This was at a time before I think we were doing as a country a better job making sure all the ages were accurate. You remember a lot of the scandals that came out in the mid-2000s. I always jump out with Fausto Carmona. That wasn't even really who he was. But I thought a part of why Alfonso had this rap of being older than he was is because when Edgardo Alfonso came up in 1995 as a 21-year-old, he was wise beyond his years. And Gary Cohen would talk about it all the time, how Edgardo Alfonso was one of the smartest baseball players he had ever seen. And I think for a 20-year-old or a 21-year-old, the thought was, well, that's because he's not 20 or 21. But it was a real thing. It was a real worry as he hit free agency. Hey, is Edgardo Alfonso really 29? But in his final year with the Mets in 2002, a bad year, but not a bad year for him. He hit 308, 16 home runs, 851 OPS, and had a 5 WAR. So not as good as 99-2000, but damn good. And the Mets decide to let him go to San Francisco. And I was pissed. I hated it. And you talk about the changing of the guard between the old 99-2000 team. Edgardo Alfonso not being on this team felt awful. It felt terrible. And what the Mets put out there was, well, he's had a back issue. And we knew he had a back issue, but we didn't know, like, is it going to derail his career just because he has a back issue? It absolutely did. The New York Mets were right to let Edgardo Alfonso go, as painful as it was. First year with the Giants, and this is why I use WAR, so you can get a good perspective. Played 142 games. He went from a 5 WAR to a 0.3 WAR. His average went from 308 to 259. His OPS went from 851 to 726. His RBIs went up, but he was clearly not the same player. The following year was a little bit better. His WAR was still under 1, but he had 289, 11 home runs, 757 OPS, but clearly not as good as what he was. And then after that, that's when he really had a drop-off. He was a negative WAR player in 2005, and by 2006, at 32 years old, he was out of baseball. He fell off completely. I wanted them to bring him back in 2006. I remember when he was DFA'd by the Angels and the Blue Jays, and he was bouncing around the sport. I thought, boy, wouldn't it be great to bring Edgardo Alfonso back, even if it's as a bench piece? It didn't happen. He played his last major league game as a 32-year-old and was terrible. I mean, he was just, it was awful. So it was one of those free agent decisions that, as painful as it was at the time, turned out to be a wise decision. I guess emotionally it would have been cool to see Alfonso there, but he was clearly done. But again, as I talked about earlier with, well, what happened to the Mets? Well, what happened to the Mets was a dark, dark thing because 03 and 04 were 2 atrocious seasons. So upon losing this incredibly popular Met, the Mets went through a brief, but nevertheless, it occurred, dark time for the franchise. The Art Howe era, if you will. And then obviously in 2005, they were aggressive in free agency, brought in Beltran, brought in Pedro, Willie Randolph becomes the manager, and they have a respectable 2005 before we know what happened in 2006. They were the best team in the National League. Let's go through a few others. Mike Hampton. Mike Hampton is one of those guys. One of the first guys we've talked about who was obviously not a career Met. This was not about a connection to Mike Hampton. They traded for him prior to the 2000 season. Gave up a lot. Gave up Roger Cedeno. Gave up Octavio Dotel in that trade. Two guys who were big contributors to the prior year's team, especially Cedeno, stealing 66 bases. Mike Hampton got off to a rough start. He had a fine 2000 season. He ends up winning the NLCS MVP. The image of him, going into the arms of Mike Piazza after Timo Perez jumped into the air and got the final out as the Mets beat the Cardinals in 5. Unfortunately, he didn't deliver in the World Series. A lot of people didn't deliver in the World Series, as he was the answer to the trivia question of who faced Roger Clemens in, Game 2 of the World Series. I wish he got another crack at it. He would have in Game 6. And I think Hampton showed us with some of his clutch pitching that there was a chance he was going to bounce back and deliver a good performance in the World Series, but his one World Series performance was bad. I wanted them to keep him. I was pissed off when he was gone. I was mad at Hampton, the whole school district crap, but I was also mad at the Wilpons because it felt like the Mets needed to build off of their success in 2000 and not say, hey, we got to the World Series. We're fine. If you're going to let Mike Hampton go, sign Mike Messina. They did not. If you're going to let Mike Hampton go, sign A-Rod. They did not. The Mets signed Kevin Appier. That was their response. But like a lot of these cases, Mike Hampton was not good after this. A part of it could be just simply going to Colorado because that was his decision. Mike Hampton decided, I'm going to go to Colorado. I'm going to test that pitchers can't pitch here. And in his first year there, he made every start and pitched to a 5.4 ERA. His second year there, he made every start and pitched to a 6.15 ERA. Then he got shipped off to Atlanta, where he had a solid season in 2003, 3.8 ERA and 31 starts. A bad year in 2004, and then would end up really having injuries affect his career. Missed half of 2005, missed all of 06, missed all of 07, and then came back to pitch a little bit in 2008 and 9 and 10 with the Braves, the Astros, and the Diamondbacks. He was never the same. It is fair to wonder that if the Mets had kept Mike Hampton and say they paid him the 8 years, $121 million, that maybe the first 3 years wouldn't have been as bad as they were. But when you are ranking bad all-time contracts, just in general in baseball history, 8 years, 121 for Mike Hampton, who would go on and pitch to an ERA of 5.75 in 2 years with Colorado, then get hurt and bounce around the league, it's an all-time bad contract. So another example where it led to bad stuff with the Mets because it led to signing Kevin Appier. 2001 wasn't a bad season, but it was a disappointing season. They finished strong as they tried to come back, especially in the post 9/11 games, which we'll get to in a later episode. But 02, disaster. 03, horrible disaster. 04, disaster. So it led to some bleak times. But letting Mike Hampton go, the facts would at least tell you, was a good decision. The problem was they didn't replace him. A tough one was John Olerud. John Olerud was one of those free agent losses, and this is rare to say this, where there was no anger towards the player. He took a little bit less money to go to the Seattle Mariners, where he was from, 3 years, $20 million. So no one was angry at John Olerud. We were disappointed. And honestly, we weren't angry at the front office. This wasn't a Wilpon special. This was just hey, the guy wanted to go home. And I like Todd Zeile. Todd Zeile was a fine Met. The Mets would have been better in 2000 with John Olerud versus Todd Zeile. John's season, by the way, in 2000, 285, 14 home runs, 103 RBIs, 831 OPS, but brilliant defense at first base. You are asking Todd Zeile to learn a new position, something they're trying to do this year with Jorge Polanco. But Olerud would go on and have a 5-WAR season in 2001, that great Mariner team. Another 5-WAR season in 2002 at age 33, hitting 300. And then after that, he would decline. But that's the 3-year contract. He signed a 3-year, $20 million deal. In the 3 years of that contract in Seattle, he was tremendous. He was really, really good. And yeah, the Mets would have been better off if he stayed. But again, it's one of those free agent losses that it doesn't stick with a lot of us because there's no one to be mad at. You're not mad at Olerud. You're not mad at the decision to go with his family. And you're not even mad with the front office. Let me get to a bunch of others. And these are all very, very different, but they're worth talking about. Ray Knight. I have heard Beningo bring this one up a lot. Ray Knight wins the World Series MVP, and Frank Cashin, in Joe's words, could not wait to break that team up. And so Ray Knight signs a one-year, $475,000 deal. It's just crazy to leave the Mets. But he was done. Like Ray Knight's next 2 years, he was not very good. One of those decisions that lives badly in Met history because they let a World Series MVP go the way they let an NLCS MVP go in Daniel Murphy. But Ray Knight was in his 30s and was a negative WAR player in the parts of 2 seasons that he spent upon leaving the New York Mets. Would things have been different if he stayed for 1987? Probably not. It's more of an emotional thing. They let Keith Hernandez go on December 7th, 1989. I'm not sure what Met fans were saying at that moment. I think we kind of knew it was over for Keith, and he goes to Cleveland and was not productive. So an emotional one, but not in terms of the results. Dave Magadan was a popular Met for a while. He leaves and signs a 2-year deal with the Marlins. And then you've got the 04-05 losses. After the Mets had that bad year in 2004, they decided to move on from the core. And the core in that case was the locker room leadership of Al Leiter and John Franco. 2 guys I adore. 2 guys I appreciate. I think we all appreciate what they did here. It was weird seeing John Franco pitch with another team. I don't like it. I try to not think of that image of him as an Astro. But it was the right decision. It was time to move on. Same thing with Al Leiter. 2 guys who had very good years with the Mets, certainly a big part of that 99-2000 run. But I think when the Mets decided to move on from Franco and Al Leiter, it was understood. Frank Viola. I didn't even think about this with Frank Viola because he's one of those Mets who I don't think anyone really thinks that positively about, but maybe also not that negatively about. He comes over, wins 20 games in his first year after they made the trade with Minnesota. Has a great year. I mean, there's just no denying it. 20-12, 2.67 ERA, 35 starts in 1990. And then in 91 and 92, makes every start 35, but 3.9 ERA, 3.4 ERA. I'm sorry, just 1991, because then they let him go as a free agent after 1991. So he was only here for parts of 2 seasons. He was traded for in the middle of the 89 season, had that really good year in 1990, had an okay year in 1991 where he made every start, but they let him go. And then in 1992, the Mets get worse. Kind of a forgotten about free agent loss. And lastly, Mike Piazza. This is one I fought. And I guess this shows the sentimentality Met fan I've been at times in my life. The Mets grew in 2005. They were the new Mets, as Carlos Beltran dubbed them with Pedro Martinez. And I thought after the 2005 season that Mike Piazza still had something to offer. And so I wanted them to bring him back, even after they made the move to acquire Paul LaDuca. Because in 2005, Mike Piazza hit 19 home runs. He had a 780 OPS. And for a right-handed bat who I viewed as he can catch a little bit, maybe he can play some first base, though they did acquire Carlos Delgado that wasn't going to allow a lot of that. But as a bat off the bench and as a guy who could catch and be the backup catcher for LaDuca, or maybe they could share time, I wanted them to bring him back. They didn't. And he actually had a really good year in San Diego, underratedly good year with the Padres in 2006. 22 home runs, 68 RBIs, 840 OPS in 126 games. Not bad. And then finally, his career ended in 2007 with the A's. I think a lot of that was sentimentality. I remember having a conversation with Bob Husler back in the day where I made the case for Mike coming back. And he told me in so many words, it's just time to move on. It just is. He's a wonderful Met. He was a great Met. He's a Hall of Famer. He's going to have the Met logo on his hat, which all happened. It's just time. But it was tough losing him. That, unlike most of these others, did lead to at least good times because 2006 was a very successful regular season. And even though 07 and 08 ended badly, the Mets were about to have winning seasons at least. Those are the free agents that we've lost. I think we could all agree the worst free agent loss in the history of the New York Mets is Zack Wheeler. I think it's far and away. As much as emotions tell us something else, emotionally, we always like to bring up Darryl Strawberry and Jose Reyes, but it's Zack Wheeler. And in terms of what they did over the life of a contract, in terms of what they did to damage us, Daniel Murphy's up there too. I would put them as the top 2 worst free agent losses in the history of the New York Mets. Now we have a few more where we're going to find out where they go. Jacob deGrom, I did not include because the jury is still out. It's not over yet. Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz, it's about to begin. But let's get to deGrom. I'll give you a state of losing Jacob deGrom. So Jake leaves for a 5-year contract. 2023, he pitches, then he gets hurt. 2024, misses most of the year, comes back late. 2025, has a wonderful season. I still don't know what the story is for all of us on what we're going to say about the loss of deGrom. I know there are many people out there who will say he'll never wanted to come back. There's no chance he was going to come back. I don't know if that's the case. If the Mets offered him what Texas offered him, does he come back? The other what if around Jacob deGrom is, okay, they sign him. Everything plays out the same. He pitches early in 23 and he gets hurt. Well, I would respond by saying no biggie. The Mets sucked in 2023. Was it going to make a difference if Verlander isn't there, but deGrom is? The caveat is 24. Does having deGrom under contract, remember the Mets paid off a lot of Verlander's deal and traded him in the deal for Drew Gilbert and Ryan Clifford. We don't know yet about Ryan Clifford, so put that aside. Does having deGrom still be here, rehabbing in 24, cause them to not sign Luis Severino or not sign Sean Manaea? If that's the case, how does that change the Met formula in 2024? deGrom comes back. Do they rush him back? How does he pitch? Do they make the postseason? If they do make the postseason, does Jacob deGrom make the difference? Are the results different in a good way? But the caveat is deGrom doesn't come back quickly enough, and the Mets actually miss the playoffs. And the OMG Met thing never really occurs because they never make the playoffs. Last year, 2025, the Mets could have used Jacob deGrom. There is no doubt. That's the one caveat where, yes, that would have been a good thing. And as far as 2026 is concerned, where 23, 24, 25, 26, still year 4 of 5. So we still have a little bit more time before we really diagnose this. What does he do in 26? So that's why I put deGrom to the side in terms of where is he going to rank. I know how I felt emotionally, very similar to how Met fans felt upon losing Darryl Strawberry. It sucked, man. I wanted him to be a career Met. And unlike a lot of those other guys, I think there's a chance Jacob deGrom ends up in the Hall of Fame. And having a guy as a career Met who goes in the Hall of Fame is still something we don't have. Tom Seaver was traded. And then as we talked about at the beginning of the pod, they let go. Mike Piazza was acquired in the middle of his career. Carlos Beltran was signed as a free agent if he ends up becoming a Met in the Hall of Fame. That's where the deGrom sting could put it high on the list. But in fairness to the loss of deGrom, and I hope you guys can at least be open-minded the same way, we still don't know where that's going to rank in free agent losses. Where does Pete rank? Where does Edwin rank? I guess we're about to find out. So, Hoff, in conclusion, would you agree with me that Zack Wheeler is far and away the worst free agent loss in the history of the Mets, and it's probably going to be difficult for even Alonso, Diaz, and deGrom to even come close to how bad of a loss that was?
I will tell you, Zack Wheeler is definitely numero uno right now, but I do think that at the end of the day, Pete Alonso is going to be the guy that we are kicking ourselves even more. I truly believe that. It's kind of almost like a Daniel Murphy unappreciated feel there too. Like it wasn't our time, it wasn't their guy. They wanted to move on from it, whatever, no big deal. It's gonna bite us. So I don't think they're gonna win a championship, but I do think it's gonna hurt.
Here's what I will tell you that's different. And this is why Zack Wheeler is always going to be tough to beat. When we went through a lot of these free agents, most of them were not better upon leaving. We were worse off, no doubt, in a lot of these cases. They weren't better. I think Pete's going to have good years. I don't think he'll be better upon leaving.
I get that.
That's going to be the big difference, and we'll find out where the Mets' success is. If I missed any that you want to bring up, free agent Ricos, free agent losses, absolutely, you can email us to ricob@gmail.com. I do want to end the Rico with somebody who has been insisting all day that he comes on the Rico Brogna because he has a message, and that is my youngest son, Spence. So, Spence, what would you like to say to the Rico audience?
Give me dollars.
We're still going with give me dollars?
Yeah.
Anything else?
6-7.
6-7, anything else? Want to give us a big let's go Mets?
Mets.
Oh, let's go Mets.
Let's go.
Oh, Brooklyn Nets? He's wearing a Brooklyn Nets sweatshirt. Go Brooklyn Nets?
Don't put the Nets.
Yeah. All right, good job, Spency. All right, thank you.
Watching Rico Brogna.
Yeah, well, say that again.
Thank you to watching
Rico Brogna.
Rico Brogna.
You had it. You did a good job. All right, guys, we appreciate you listening and downloading another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.